They said it was just acting, a temporary possession of character, a costume you wear, then shed once the camera stops rolling. But for some stars, the mask refused to come off, and the character twisted, tormented, or tragically adored never left. In the golden corridors of Hollywood, behind the powder and lights, some roles didn't elevate careers. They consumed lives. These were not just performances, they were hauntings. Some actors spent decades trying to prove they were more than that one face, that one scream, that one line. Others simply faded, collapsing under the weight of the persona that the world refused to let them escape. Some fought, some embraced, some were broken, and some became the very thing they once pretended to be. This isn't about typecasting. This is about lives that unraveled, minds that cracked, and identities that blurred until even the actor wasn't sure who remained. Tonight, we peel back the velvet curtain to reveal 20 stars whose roles didn't make them but marked them. Some so deeply they were never seen again. Others were always seen but never truly known. When the role becomes more real than the life behind it, who's acting and who's already lost themselves. 1. Anthony Perkins, trapped in the mind of Norman Bates. Before Psycho, Anthony Perkins was charming, clean-cut, and fast-rising, a young actor with Broadway roots and matinee idol looks. But one role shattered that trajectory. As Norman Bates, he delivered a performance so haunting, so delicately disturbed, that it became unforgettable. Tragically, that's exactly what Hollywood did. Never forgot. No matter how many films he made afterward, Perkins was never allowed to be anything but Bates. Studios stopped offering romantic leads. Directors saw in his eyes not complexity, but madness. And audiences, perhaps the cruelest of all, gasped not in admiration, but in recognition. There he is, the motel killer again. The deeper tragedy was that Perkins wasn't acting from nowhere. A closeted man in a time of public ruin for queer stars, he understood repression and duality intimately. Norman Bates, with his boyish politeness and hidden violence, mirrored that internal split. The role didn't just echo him, it amplified him. In time, even he seemed unsure where Norman ended and Anthony began. When he returned to the character in Psycho 2, 3, and even 4, it felt less like a career move than a final surrender, as if Bates had become his true skin. He died in 1992, praised but never liberated, and Norman Bates lives on immortal, infamous, his shadow stretching longer than Perkins' entire career. Did Anthony Perkins master Norman Bates, or did Norman Bates master him? 2. Linda Blair, possessed forever by the devil's daughter. At just 14 years old, Linda Blair descended into cinematic hell. Her role as Regan McNeil in The Exorcist shocked a generation, contorting her body, vomiting green sludge, spewing profanity that no child should even understand. The film was a phenomenon, but Linda's life never returned to normal. Hollywood praised her, nominated her for an Oscar, then punished her. She was no longer an actress. She was the possessed girl. Studios recoiled. Casting agents hesitated. Even the public blurred fiction and reality. Religious protesters followed her, claimed she was genuinely touched by evil. Linda tried to escape. She posed for magazines, embraced activism, even took on light-hearted roles. But Regan followed her. Journalists asked about the pea soup. Filmgoers whispered about demons. And when her career stalled, tabloids filled the silence with rumors, drug use, instability, dark energy. She returned to the role in Exorcist 2, a misguided sequel that only deepened the wound. Whatever artistry she had once shown was buried beneath the mythos of that first scream, that first head spin. And even decades later, in interviews and documentaries, she's still answering for a character she barely remembers becoming. Linda Blair didn't just act in a horror film. She became the haunted relic of its legacy. When you're possessed on screen, how do you convince the world the demon didn't stay? 3. Vivien Leigh, haunted by Scarlett O'Hara and shadows of herself. Vivien Leigh won eternal fame as Scarlett O'Hara in Gone with the Wind. Her beauty was magnetic, her performance iconic. But behind the dazzling Southern belle was a woman unraveling. Scarlett was ambitious, manipulative, unrelenting, a woman who masked pain with defiance. So was Vivien, and while the public adored the performance, those closest to her whispered of how much of Scarlett had seeped into her off-screen life. Vivien became fiercely controlling, often emotionally erratic, and tragically convinced that the world expected her to remain forever youthful, forever Scarlett. As the years passed, Leigh's bipolar disorder worsened. The line between her roles and her reality blurred. She lost herself in characters that mirrored her inner torment, A Streetcar Named Desire, Ship of Fools, each performance extracting more than it gave back. Her relationship with Laurence Olivier, once a passionate artistic union, collapsed under the weight of her emotional swings and artistic obsessions. Even in her final years, suffering from tuberculosis and declining mentally, she kept performing. The applause remained, but the sparkle was gone, replaced by a haunted brilliance. Scarlett O'Hara made Vivien Leigh immortal. But immortality came at a price. Was Vivien acting all along or simply becoming the woman the world demanded she be? 4. George Reeves, the man who couldn't stop being Superman. George Reeves was never meant to be a superhero. A classically trained actor with ambitions of serious drama, he reluctantly donned the cape for television's Adventures of Superman. The show was a hit. Kids adored him. Parents trusted him. But Reeves? He felt trapped in a costume that mocked his ambition. Offers for other roles vanished. Directors didn't want George, they wanted Superman. And Superman, unlike George, didn't age, didn't falter, didn't brood. Reeves grew despondent. He couldn't escape the grinning, invincible persona. Off-screen, he drank more, grew bitter, resented what the suit had stolen. Behind the scenes, scandal brewed. A rumored affair with the wife of a studio executive, fights with producers, paranoia. And then in 1959, he was found dead from a gunshot wound to the head. Officially ruled a suicide. Unofficially, nothing was clear. Conspiracy theories still swirl. Was it depression? Murder? A man who couldn't take being seen only as a symbol? The tragedy is this. In trying to escape Superman, Reeves proved he was still human. But Hollywood and the world preferred the myth. What happens when your greatest role becomes the prison you die in? Cinque Christopher Reeve, a hero in chains. The irony was cruel. Christopher Reeve became a global icon for playing the man who could fly. His portrayal of Superman was majestic, graceful, noble, impossibly human. Audiences believed in him, and he believed in the message. But once the cape came off, Reeve found himself grounded by Hollywood, by typecasting, and eventually, by fate. Post-Superman, serious roles eluded him. He took to the stage, fought for artistic credibility, pushed back against the endless offers for more heroism. But the public didn't want Christopher. They wanted Clark Kent. And when the franchise soured, so did the roles. Then came the fall. In 1995, a horseback accident left him paralyzed from the neck down. Superman, broken. The imagery was inescapable. The man who once defied gravity was now confined to a chair, breathing through machines, reduced visibly to human limits. But Reeve didn't vanish. He transformed, became an activist, a speaker, a force. Yet even then, the shadow of Superman loomed over everything. Interviews called him the real Superman, now trading fiction for irony. And the role he once tried to escape became a mantle he could never remove. Christopher Reeve's courage was undeniable, but so was the curse. Did Superman lift him up, or did the world let him fall because it couldn't imagine him as anything else? 6. Malcolm McDowell, the clockwork that never stopped ticking. Malcolm McDowell was only in his late 22nd when he stepped into the role of Alex DeLarge in Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange, a sadistic, charismatic delinquent who spoke in poetic violence. The performance was electric and radioactive. The film was banned in several countries. Audiences were horrified, then mesmerized, then repulsed again. McDowell had delivered something too convincing. He didn't act like Alex, he became him, and the world never forgot. It followed him. Casting directors flinched, audiences whispered. He was that guy, the one who smiled while smashing skulls to Beethoven. McDowell himself admitted that the role changed him, that after Kubrick's relentless filming style, his sense of reality warped. He'd wake from dreams in Alex's voice. Roles offered afterward? Villains, psychopaths, men with cold eyes and twisted laughs. McDowell embraced the work, but part of him knew they weren't hiring Malcolm, they were hiring Alex again. He tried Shakespeare, he tried drama, but the industry had already decided. Decades later, McDowell joked about being typecast, but behind the wit was something bitter. Because for all his talent, depth, and ambition, he was chained to a single image, his eyes lit with ultraviolence, frozen in Kubrick's wide-angle lens. When your most iconic role is a monster, how do you convince the world you're not still smiling behind the mask? Bạn có muốn tôi tiếp tục với nhân vật thứ 78? Jack Nicholson, Sissy Spacek không? 7. Jack Nicholson, The Madness That Never Left. By the time The Shining was released in 1980, Jack Nicholson had already been hailed as a force of cinematic chaos. But as Jack Torrance, the failed writer turned homicidal caretaker, he became something else. Unhinged, unforgettable, and forever tethered to madness. It wasn't just the role, it was him. The curling grin, the explosive cadence, the eyes that flickered between charm and violence. Audiences couldn't separate the man from the maniac. And Jack, ever the showman, leaned in. But behind the grin was a darker truth. Nicholson's personal life was a maze of volatility, broken relationships, whispered abuse, public outbursts. Was he drawing on something internal to play Torrance? Or had Torrance embedded something new inside him? Kubrick's direction didn't help. Endless takes, psychological exhaustion, a set that blurred reality and performance. And after the film, Nicholson's image shifted permanently. No longer the rebel from Easy Rider or the misfit of 5 Easy Pieces. Now, he was danger in a suit, insanity in a smile. Even decades later, in interviews and retrospectives, Nicholson couldn't fully shake Torrance. Fans quoted, "Here's Johnny," like it was comedy. But Jack knew it wasn't. Did Nicholson control the madness, or just learn how to wear it better than anyone else? 8. Sissy Spacek, forever covered in blood. When Carrie exploded onto screens in 1976, Sissy Spacek wasn't a scream queen. She was a revelation, quiet, awkward, painfully sincere. And then, in the film's final act, she became myth, drenched in blood, arms extended, eyes blank with vengeance. That image, white dress soaked red, never left the public mind. And neither did it leave Spacek. Though she went on to a decorated career, earning awards and acclaim, the specter of Carrie White lingered. Directors saw her fragility and cast her as tragic. Fans saw her calm voice and waited for the explosion. And deep down, Spacek admitted she never really left the gymnasium. Not entirely. The role wasn't just horror, it was transformation. For audiences, it was a fear of the outsider. For Sissy, it was a mirror of every soft-spoken woman dismissed, abused, and finally uncontainable. In later interviews, she spoke of playing Carrie like she was remembering a possession, not acting, channeling, becoming. And though she embraced new roles, the blood always clung. Symbolic, inevitable. When your breakthrough role ends in a massacre, can you ever truly play anything else? 9. Shelley Duvall, broken by the take that never ended. Shelley Duvall didn't play a woman unraveling, she was unraveled. Cast as Wendy Torrance in The Shining, she entered Stanley Kubrick's labyrinthine vision with hopeful eyes. What followed was psychological warfare disguised as direction. Kubrick demanded dozens, sometimes over 100 takes per scene. He isolated her, he berated her, he pushed her to the brink. In one infamous shot, she swung a bat at Nicholson's character, tears streaming, hair falling out. It wasn't acting, it was collapse. The performance was raw, too raw. Critics mocked her, audiences dismissed her as weak, but that fragility was etched into her bones over months of mental attrition. And afterward, Shelley Duvall was never the same. Hollywood didn't offer her complexity. It offered caricature, quirky roles, strange characters. She drifted from the spotlight. Whispers of instability followed. Years later, when she re-emerged, visibly changed and mentally fragile, the headlines screamed, tragic, lost, damaged. But no one asked if Wendy had ever really left her. Was Shelley Duvall destroyed by the role, or by the belief that actors must suffer to be believed? 10. Janet Leigh, showered in fear for a lifetime. She was on screen for less than 30 minutes, but Janet Leigh changed cinema forever. As Marion Crane in Psycho, she took a risk playing a woman who steals, flees, and dies early in a moment, so shocking, it fractured audience expectations permanently. The shower scene became legend. Frame by frame, stab by stab, it embedded itself in the collective subconscious. But while the audience could look away, Leigh never really could. She confessed for years afterward. She could no longer take showers. Doors had to be unlocked. Curtains had to be open. Her sense of vulnerability, once theoretical, had become visceral. Fans approached her not to praise her performances, but to mimic the scream. Though she continued to work, she never escaped Psycho. Even in other roles, directors played off her legacy. She was forever the woman who died in the shower. And yet, she didn't die in real life. She lived decades beyond that scene. But for the world, she never truly walked out of that bathroom. When a single scene becomes a monument, can the actor behind it ever escape its shadow? 11. Mia Farrow, the mother of a nightmare she couldn't wake from. In Rosemary's Baby, Mia Farrow delivered one of the most quietly devastating performances in horror history. Fragile, waif-like, and utterly consumed, she embodied a woman betrayed by everyone around her, gaslighted, isolated, and ultimately forced to cradle the spawn of evil. But for Farrow, the nightmare didn't end with the credits. Filming was a psychological crucible. Director Roman Polanski demanded realism, refusing special effects, pushing Farrow into moments of raw despair. The weight loss, the short hair, the haunted eyes weren't costume decisions. They were symptom. And when the film soared, so did the associations. Pharaoh, with her delicate features and whispery voice, became an icon of helpless dread. Even as she pursued other roles, that image lingered. The girl who bore the devil and didn't scream. She played mothers, victims, wives on the edge, rarely the powerful, rarely the unpredictable. Off-screen, her life mirrored the surreal chaos of the film. Her relationship with Woody Allen, the scandals that followed, the tabloid dissection of her motherhood, it was as though Rosemary's paranoia had never left her, only grown more elaborate. To this day, when people see Mia Farrow, they don't ask about activism or legacy. They remember that final, devastating lullaby over a black cradle. What happens when the role you play becomes the prophecy everyone expects you to fulfill? 12. William Shatner, trapped in the command chair. Captain James T. Kirk was bold, fearless, and indelibly charismatic. He piloted Star Trek into the cultural consciousness and made William Shatner a household name, but in doing so, it locked him inside a spaceship that he could never leave. Shatner tried to branch out stage roles, crime dramas, even musical experiments. But fans didn't want William. They wanted the swagger, the cadence, the command. Studios reinforced the image. Parodies multiplied. Shatner became a caricature of Kirk, and Kirk was immortal. He embraced it, then rejected it, then embraced it again. He authored memoirs to reclaim control. He returned for movie after movie, even accepting Kirk's death only for the character to be revived in other ways. Shatner watched as younger actors wore his role like a second skin. The tragedy wasn't professional, it was existential. Kirk had become bigger than the man who played him. And no matter how far Shatner traveled from Priceline commercials to Emmy-winning turns, he was always steering that same starship. Even now, in old age, his voice is still dubbed over tech, his face memed, his legacy folded inside Kirk's silhouette. When your greatest creation overshadows your humanity, do you become a monument or a prisoner? 13. Mark Hamill, the Jedi who couldn't come home. When Star Wars debuted in 1977, Mark Hamill became the unlikely face of a revolution. As Luke Skywalker, he was innocence, destiny, and rebellion all wrapped in one. But for Hamill, the triumph was double-edged because, while Luke became a myth, the actor inside him vanished. Studios hesitated to cast him in anything else. He lacked the smirking edge of Han Solo or the maturity of Obi-Wan. To directors, he was too space opera, too boy next galaxy. He dabbled in theater. He lent his voice to animation, but the world didn't follow. They only asked, "When's the next Star Wars?" Hamill disappeared from the screen. Then, years later, re-emerged not as a movie star, but a voice in the shadows. The Joker in Batman, the animated series, a performance that proved his range, his power. But even that brilliance was muffled by Skywalker's glare. When The Force Awakens arrived, he returned as an older Luke, wiser, bitter, haunted. Some called it art, others called it betrayal. But for Hamill, it was closure, a chance to redefine a character that had once defined him. And yet, even now, no matter how many roles he takes, memes he leans into, or wisdom he shares, one truth remains. He will always be the boy who looked at twin suns and never got to walk away from them. 14. Patty Duke, the miracle that took her voice. At 16, Patty Duke stunned audiences with her portrayal of Helen Keller in The Miracle Worker. Blind, deaf, feral, full of rage, her performance was a revelation. She won an Oscar, became the youngest to do so at the time. But behind the award was a girl already fraying at the seams. Playing Helen required surrender, physical, emotional, spiritual. The line between actress and role blurred quickly. Duke internalized the isolation, the struggle, the screams without words, and as her career progressed, she never quite recovered that sense of self. The industry crowned her a prodigy, but offered her little room to evolve. She was cast in look-alike roles, tragic girls, wild children, victims of the system, all while, privately, she battled undiagnosed bipolar disorder. Her moods swung violently, her personal life spiraled. Even when she found success in television, she remained haunted by her own early legend. The Miracle label became a prison. It left no room for mistakes, or darkness, or rage. Later in life, she became an advocate for mental health. She reclaimed her name. But still, for millions, she is that girl in the white dress, flailing in the dark, fighting hands that tried to tame her. What if the miracle wasn't that Patty Duke played Helen Keller, but that she survived becoming her? 15. Faye Dunaway, the mother of all monsters. When Faye Dunaway accepted the role of Joan Crawford in Mommy Dearest, she didn't just step into the shoes of a Hollywood icon, she stepped into a myth already cracking under its own weight. What she delivered was explosive, theatrical, and unforgettable. But it didn't win her more acclaim. It cursed her. The film was meant to be a searing drama about abuse and legacy. Instead, it became cult camp. No wire hangers, echoed in midnight screenings. Audiences laughed at scenes meant to disturb. Critics accused Dunaway of overacting, of exaggeration, but those close to the production knew she became Joan. Terrifyingly so. And in the years that followed, Dunaway's image shifted. She was no longer the cold elegance of Chinatown, the controlled power of network. She was mommy dearest, difficult, demanding, dangerous. The damage ran deep. Studios backed away. Co-stars whispered. Her career cooled. Dunaway herself eventually refused to speak about the film, calling it a betrayal, a distortion. But perhaps what frightened her most wasn't the audience's reaction. It was how close she came to believing she was Joan. In trying to humanize a monster, she became one in the public eye. What if Faye Dunaway didn't go too far, but simply went somewhere the rest of us were afraid to follow? Number 16. John Travolta. Dancing with a destiny he couldn't outrun. John Travolta's rise was meteoric. Saturday Night Fever made him immortal. As Tony Manero, he swaggered through Brooklyn with restless ambition, hips like a weapon, eyes that burned with longing. The world danced with him, and then the music never stopped. Every role that followed echoed Tony. Romantic but flawed, street smart but wounded. Even when he stretched into drama, action, or comedy, the disco ball never really stopped spinning in the background. Travolta's own life mirrored that pattern, rising, falling, returning. He became a symbol of Hollywood reinvention, thanks to Pulp Fiction. But even that comeback leaned on his past. Cool, retro, rebranded. He couldn't shake the sense that he was playing versions of himself, ghosts of Tony in different clothes. Then there were the personal tragedies, the loss of his son, the weight of fame, the public scrutiny. All of it fed into the myth that Travolta was always dancing against fate, never quite free. He remains beloved, but for many, he is still frozen under those disco lights forever in that white suit, forever chasing something he already caught and lost. Can you ever leave the dance floor if the world refuses to stop the music? 17. Toni Collette, the face of grief that became a genre. Before Hereditary, Toni Collette had built a career on range. She could be quirky, Muriel's Wedding, tender, The Sixth Sense, sharp, Little Miss Sunshine. But then came Hereditary, and everything shifted. As Annie Graham, Collette delivered a performance so raw it felt surgical. She didn't play grief, she exhumed it. Her face twisted into expressions Hollywood rarely allows. Her voice cracked into primal howls. It was beyond horror. It was human terror, undressed. And yet, she wasn't nominated for an Oscar. Critics raved, audiences trembled, but the industry flinched because Collette had become something too real, too unsettling, too unmarketable. Since then, even her lighter roles carry shadows. Casting directors want the broken mother, the haunted woman, the emotional collapse made elegant. And audiences, whether they know it or not, wait for her to scream again. In Hereditary, her character spirals into darkness. In real life, Toni Collette escaped that fate. But the ghost of Annie Graham still lingers behind her eyes. What happens when you portray grief so perfectly? The world forgets you can smile. 18. Bruce Dern, the villain everyone took personally. Bruce Dern was never the traditional Hollywood lead. Gangly, intense, unsettling, he thrived on roles that pulsed with menace. And then he did something irreversible. He shot John Wayne. In The Cowboys, 1972, Dern played the villain who gunned down the Duke. It was a bold choice, a career-making role, but for many, especially in conservative America, it was unforgivable. He didn't just kill a character, he assassinated a symbol. Audiences booed him in public. Studios hesitated. He was labeled dangerous, unlikable, bad for the brand. Dern embraced it, leaned into the outlaw energy. But even as he carved out a career of rich, complex villains, the shadow of Wayne's fall never quite faded. Decades later, when Quentin Tarantino cast him as a cryptic relic in The Hateful Eight, it felt less like a comeback and more like a reckoning. The man who broke the cowboy myth now played a ghost of the Old West, silent, watchful, possibly worse than we imagined. Bruce Dern never escaped the villainy. He wore it like armor. But one wonders, when your most infamous role bleeds into public judgment, do you become the character or their punishment? 19. Shelley Winters, drowned again and again. Shelley Winters was no stranger to transformation. From blonde bombshell to powerhouse character actress, she reinvented herself again and again. But one image refused to leave her behind. The woman who sank slowly Helplessly, in the dark, in Night of the Hunter, she was the trusting widow, seduced, betrayed, and silenced beneath the water, her hair floating like seaweed. In the Poseidon adventure, she swam to heroism only to die with a desperate gasp. Over time, drowning became motif, then symbol, then trap. It wasn't just the roles. It was how the industry began to see her, as expendable, tragic, destined to suffer. Her weight became a subject of ridicule. Her sacrifices were overlooked. She was praised, then pigeonholed. The woman who always gave too much and always sank for it, and Shelley knew it. She joked about her watery deaths, even leaned into them. But in later years, the bitterness showed. She had won Oscars. She had outlived her leading men. And still, audiences remembered her most vividly when she disappeared below the surface. When the water closes over you again and again, do you stop fighting? Or learn to hold your breath forever? 20. Piper Laurie, the mother you couldn't escape. Piper Laurie had already endured Hollywood's shallow expectations when she accepted the role of Margaret White in Carrie, a religious zealot, shrieking with divine fury, turning motherhood into horror incarnate. What she created was unforgettable, not just terrifying, but convincing. Her eyes wide with fanaticism, her voice a dagger cloaked in scripture. She turned a one-dimensional monster into something almost operatic. And then, she was frozen there. For years, casting directors couldn't see her as anything else. Not a matriarch, not a romantic figure, not a woman with softness. Only the mother who saw sin in every shadow and blood in every daughter. Piper Laurie didn't fade. She refused. But Hollywood refused her back. She worked, quietly, selectively. But the magnitude of Margaret White loomed. Even her return in The Faculty carried shades of the same monster repackaged, but not forgotten. In later years, she spoke candidly about the role, proud but cautious, as if acknowledging that to become that mother even for a moment meant sacrificing something soft inside. What if Margaret White didn't destroy Carrie, but consumed Piper Laurie first? Bonus fact: Dominique Dunne, the curse that arrived too early. She wasn't the lead. She didn't have decades to wrestle with her legacy. But Dominique Dunne, just 22 years old, delivered a performance in Poltergeist that seemed to echo far beyond her screen time. As Dana Freeling, the teenage daughter in a suburban home turned spectral battlefield, she was fragile, frightened, and unforgettable. And then she was gone. Months after the film's release, Dunne was strangled in her driveway by an ex-boyfriend. Her death shocked Hollywood not just for its brutality, but for its eerie alignment with the film's ominous tone. Poltergeist was already whispered to be cursed. Cast deaths, on-set accidents, equipment failing. But Dunne's tragedy felt different, final, personal. The role should have been a beginning. Instead, it became a tombstone. In the years since, conspiracy theories flourished. Was the film truly cursed? Was Dunne's death a tragic coincidence, or something worse? But beyond the headlines, something more haunting remains. An actress whose career was swallowed by a narrative she never got to finish. She didn't get typecast, she didn't age into her character, she never got the chance to escape the role, because the role, some say, escaped into real life first. What do you call it when the role doesn't just follow the actor, but takes them before they even know it's begun? Some roles make a career, others take something far more personal. From haunted daughters to broken mothers, from eternal heroes to forgotten villains, these were not just performances, they were transformations, and sometimes irreversible ones. So now we ask you, which of these actors do you think truly escaped their role, and which were never seen again without it? Was it Hollywood that refused to let go, or the characters themselves that refused to die? Let us know the one that stayed with you the longest, because maybe, just maybe, that's how the curse continues.